Good day. My name is Tom. I live near Indianapolis, Indiana, and today I want to share with you some tips and tricks and programming features and some, how would I call it, issues with the Carbon Cub S2 that I have seen as I've gotten back into RC flying after being away for 25 years. And let me tell you, a few things have changed. I mean, it's wow, unbelievable the difference between now and my old balsa and film covered models of 25 years ago with a basic Futaba 4-channel transmitter, which was all you ever needed back then. And of course we had the glow engines instead of today's electrics. Still, some people like to fly with the glow, but got to tell you, having tried electrics now, I don't think I'll ever go back to glow power. It's just too darn convenient and no messy. Okay, so I bought the Carbon S2 from Horizon, the complete kit, ready to fly kit with the transmitter, thinking that that was what I would need to get back into flying. I should have watched a few more YouTube videos before I sprang for that exact kit. I'm pretty happy with the airplane, with a few caveats that I'll share with you later, but the transmitter that came with it is far, far short of what you would need if you're getting back into this hobby or beginning for taking maximum advantage of all of the innovation that's happened in this last 25 years. You need something that's programmable. That DSX is not programmable. Let me grab it here out of my drawer. I think, yep, I did. I put it back in here last night. This is the DXS that comes with the Carbon Cub S2, and it's just like the old Futaba 4-channel radio that I have, except it's got 6 channels. It does a couple of extra things. They tell you that it won't work with flaps on this airplane, but in fact you can install flaps and control them. I can't remember which switch. I think it was that one. Off of an extra channel that's installed that they don't tell you about in the instructions. But yeah, it's a perfectly good radio for what it does. It's got flight mode selection. It's got the basic throttle, rudder, elevator, and ailerons with trims that you can certainly fly the airplane with it. But if you plan on going any further with this hobby, don't buy the airplane with this transmitter. Instead, get something like this one, the NX8. It doesn't have to be this expensive. I sprung for the 8-channel version of the new NX technology because I intend to go further than the NX6 or the DX6 will take me. Eventually, it may be a few years, but I felt like it was worth the extra few dollars to get the extra 2 channels versus the 6-channel version of this. And I think there's a 10-channel version available as well. This thing is an unbelievable technology. And I want to share with you a few of the programming things that I've done with it that I haven't seen in other videos. But first of all, I want to talk about one of the things that makes this airplane so attractive to beginners but has some major pitfalls, and that is the beginner mode. This airplane sitting behind me is the Carbon Cub S2, and I started off flying it in beginner mode. Now, I've got 3,600 hours over 50 years of full-scale airplanes. I know you hobbyists don't like to call them real airplanes because these are in fact real airplanes, but full-scale. Most of that in Cessnas, and I'm pretty good at it. And this airplane in basic mode actually flies like one of the Cessnas I fly, a $400,000 182T with the Garmin autopilot in it. And I can make that autopilot do what this airplane does in basic mode, except I can't land it. I can't do anything major in terms of bank angle without overcoming the autopilot and potentially breaking a shear pin in one of the servos. All I have to do is I'm up flying along at 4,000 feet, and I engage the autopilot, and I hit the altitude hold button. And that's exactly what this airplane does in beginner mode, except this limits your bank angle. So in that 182T, if I roll the airplane left or right with the ailerons and let go, it comes right back to level flight. If I raise the nose or lower the nose with the elevator and release it, it will come back to level flight. Not very much fun flying. And the autopilot would do a lot of other things besides that, but that's just in the very basic mode. The problem with that is that's not the way an airplane flies without an autopilot. And eventually you're going to want to fly this thing in experience mode. And in experience mode, when you bank the airplane with the ailerons and you release that bank, it won't come back to level flight. It's going to stay in that bank. So if you bank the airplane and that's all you do, and you release the controls, the airplane's going to crash. And it won't take long. Because when you bank that airplane, and I haven't got the transmitter powered on, when you bank that airplane, the lift coming off this wing creates an energy vector. Here, all of that lift is available to overcome gravity. When I turn the airplane, part of that lift is now being used to turn the airplane. The result is there's not as much lift left for maintaining level flight. So the airplane, because of that, gravity is now stronger than lift. It's going to start to descend in a spiral. Depending on your altitude, it may take, a few seconds up to maybe 30 seconds. If you don't do anything, the airplane is going to just plow into the ground. To overcome that, when you turn, you also have to use a little elevator to raise the angle of attack. Now, for a beginner, that's not intuitive. If you have any experience at all with flying RC airplanes or full scale, you know that you have to, when you turn, you have to use a little elevator to maintain level flight. In beginner mode, the autopilot does that for you, but not in experience mode. And for that reason, someone who is extremely inexperienced, who's never flown one of these airplanes before, and has no full-scale experience and doesn't know about that little trap, is going to be very surprised when they make their first turn in experience mode to see the airplane start to descend. Now, intuitively, if you know what you're doing, you should pull some elevator to stop the descent. And if you do, you'll get a nice constant rate. If you did just right, a nice constant rate, constant altitude turn. If you don't, you're going to crash. And if you do it at low altitude, you may not be able to react quick enough on that first turn after takeoff. So for that reason, for neophytes who've never flown an airplane of any kind, I really don't like basic, I keep calling it basic. It's beginner mode. They both start with a B. That's the confusion. So if you buy this airplane and you have never flown any kind of airplane, you have no experience at all, I strongly suggest that you get together with an experienced RC pilot for your first few flights in advanced mode, or experience mode. Because the odds are, if you don't immediately go back to beginner mode, you'll crash it. Now that is one good feature of beginner mode. And that is that if you get the airplane in a situation in advanced mode where it's totally out of control, you have no idea which way the airplane's going, which way is up or down or left or right. On my transmitter here, all I have to do is flip that switch and that puts it back in beginner mode. Bingo, it'll level itself, fly off in a fixed direction, and fairly level flight. So for that, I like it. It's a safety feature, and I've used it a few times. Okay, so that covers that. So again, if you're not an experienced pilot, don't use experience mode until you actually have some experience, and you're probably going to need some help with that if you've never flown an airplane in your life. Okay. Secondly, I want to talk about some issues I've had with this airplane. There haven't been many, but there have been a few. And notice I actually have it powered on right now. Let me just make sure. Yep, okay. I have throttle cut on. Okay. One significant issue has been the tail feathers. So back here, there are two screws, and that's all that holds these tail feathers on. And you have this tail wheel here that is mounted in a plastic, with a plastic bracket that fits on the bottom of the rudder. I was out flying it the first couple of days, and I got down and noticed that it was flying a little erratically, and these tail feathers were extremely loose. So I'm going to show you what the problem was. Oops. Just a second, let me get this screw out of here. Let's see if that'll drop out now. Probably won't. Okay, yep, let me turn this video off and get that screw out. Okay, back with you. So that's the screw that came with the model. It's too short and it's stripped out. That's a screw that I found in my collection of screws that I've accumulated over 30 or 40 years, and it's stored in several bins behind me. It's a bit longer, and it fits further into the tube that holds this stabilizer assembly together. So this screw fits in that hole, and you just screw it in to that little plastic tube, and this one stripped out. And I couldn't get it to capture, or couldn't get any purchase with it to tighten it up. So I went back and found that one. That's important because if that thing comes loose on you in flight, you're going to lose the airplane. So if you get this kit, I strongly suggest that you go out and find a screw that's a bit longer than the one that comes with it to hold that tail assembly together. So I'll be back in a minute as soon as I get everything. Okay, second issue, flaps. I wanted to try out flaps on this airplane, and the manual that comes with the airplane says, yes, you can hook up the flaps, but don't try it because you don't have any way to control the elevators when the flaps go down. There's no, they call it mixing control between the flaps and the elevators. Any airplane that has flaps on it, when you put the flaps down, you're going to get more lift out of this wing. The airplane's going to want to balloon up. And this one really does, even in beginner mode. But in experience mode, it really takes off up, and it'll even stall. So do not, unless you get a different transmitter, put flaps on this airplane and try to use them. It's not good news, especially if you're close to the ground. Another item that came to my attention was the hinges. These cheaper airplanes come with hinges that are basically made out of tape, and they've painted it silver, so it's actually kind of hard to see. And that tape is probably not all that durable, but more importantly, these control surfaces, the ailerons especially, were binding. That is, you go into experience mode, go to full aileron throw, and the servos would start chattering because the ailerons were binding and weren't able to travel freely as far as the servos were trying to take them. So I pulled all the control surfaces off, elevator, rudder, ailerons, and flaps. I did that by taking an X-Acto knife and slicing through the tape that was holding them on as the hinge surface, and then went out and bought some hinges from my local hobby shop. And those hinges look like this, little nylon steel pinned hinges. And you mount these simply by taking a really sharp knife, cutting slots in the styrofoam, putting a little drop of medium CA on the end, not up close to the hinges, because if you get CA in the hinges, they'll freeze. Slip these in to the control surface and wherever it mates to with a couple of slots. Make sure that you cut those slots so that these control surfaces fit back where they were with the taped hinges very carefully, and then you've got a very nice hinged surface. It'll be a lot more durable. All it takes is a little medium CA and a $5 sack of these little hinges. Takes a little time to do it, but I think it's well worth it. Another issue in experience mode is that the recommended factory installed setting for the elevators doesn't give you enough throw to really have some fun with the airplane. So if you look at the owner's manual that comes with the airplane, the recommended position on the servo arm is the next closest to the center. I move that all the way to the outside throw of the servo arm to get more elevator. And when you do that, you can, if you want less elevator, you can get it through programming the servo throw with the programmable NX8 or 6 or 10 or whatever you buy, or any other programmable transmitter. And that will give you a lot more control authority. The issue there is getting the airplane to flare properly coming in for a landing. Oh, let's see. Oh yes, and the propeller. The prop that came with this airplane wasn't very well balanced, and the airplane was vibrating at full power, and it seemed like it was the prop. So I bought a couple of these replacement props from Horizon, and they're much better balanced. I think they look nicer too because they've got these nice yellow tips, and the performance has been great. So again, a few little tips of things to look for. Oh, one more thing. I just remembered this one. These struts. Initially, I thought the struts were just for show, just to make the model look more realistic. And then one day, in fact, just a couple of days ago, I was out flying this thing in advanced mode, and I noticed that when I was making some really tight loops, that these wings were bending upward at a bit of an alarming angle. Now, I think they're okay, but the struts will stop that bending upward motion of those wings. And I suppose it's possible you might pull a wing off, although it has a carbon spar through here that should prevent that. But just to be safe, I put the struts back on the airplane. I don't know, I might be able to pull a wing off. I kind of doubt it. And then one more minor modification. The airplane comes with little plastic gray wheel pants not wheel pants, I'm sorry, strut covers, landing strut covers that fit over the landing struts. Those kept popping off. I just threw them away. They're absolutely not necessary for anything. And then, one final issue that happened to me very recently. I had a hard landing that resulted in this joint right here in this cover that fits on the bottom that holds the landing gear and struts and the latch and the cover. There's a seam right here, and that seam got this styrofoam around here got stressed, and that seam separated, and I couldn't keep this cover on, the battery cover on after that. It would come off every time I took off, and somehow I didn't like the idea of the battery coming loose in flight, but I don't know if actually it would have mattered or not. This battery is supposed to be held down by a strap and Velcro, but I really kind of like the idea of having it on there. Besides that, it's got my FAA license number and my AMA number on there as well. So in case I ever lose the airplane, I definitely want to lose it with this on there, so maybe somebody can find me and give me my airplane back. But I put a little bit of CA on this, just a little drop of medium CA, and then clamped that together until it dried. So hopefully that's going to fix that. I was coming from a world of building my own airplanes out of balsa wood and filming them and heating the film and shrinking it and all that stuff. I was a little bit concerned about just how durable these styrofoam models were going to be and repairable. But oh my gosh, this airplane's taken a beating, trust me. And it's held together pretty well. I hate to think of what my old SIG balsa model would have suffered if I had made some of the landings I've made with this one. It probably would have taken me a lot longer to fix it than it has this one. In fact, I've seen pictures of styrofoam models that were in multiple pieces that were glued back together and flew again. I think as long as you can find all the pieces, you can probably do that, because it does fit together, back together really well. Okay, next section. I'm going to turn the video off and I'll be back with you in a minute. Okay. Just turned the transmitter on, checked out a few things, made sure, yep, we've got throttle cut on, and I've got some reports coming through. I've turned the volume down with this knob right here so you can't hear things. I'll turn it up here in a little while. So I found one feature in this programmable transmitter that is really handy, and that's sound. I can set warnings for various things. Right now I've got battery voltage turned on. That comes off the smart ESC that's in this airplane that has some significant telemetry capabilities. I've got control switch changes set up to tell me what I'm changing to, and I'm going to demonstrate those now. So, throttle cut. 80. Okay, volume 80. I've got it in, right now it's in throttle cut is on, which is switch D position 2. If I change it to position 1,
throttle cut on.
It's still on. If I change it to 0,
throttle cut off.
Throttle cut is now off.
0.5 volts, 0 amps, 75 Fahrenheit.
And that's the ESC reporting. So now you can see
11.4 volts, 3 amps, 77 Fahrenheit. ESC 11.4 volts, 2 amps, 77 Fahrenheit. Volume 95.
you'll be able to hear the ESC reporting here in a minute. Okay, switch E is flight mode. Right now it's in beginner.
Intermediate mode.
Goes to intermediate, which I really don't like because it's just basic on steroids, or I'm sorry, beginner. Then let's go experienced.
Experienced mode.
Okay, so I've got different settings on Rate and Expo set up for those, and all depends on where that switch is. So let's go back to beginner, and we can tell by the way, by the red light, we're in experienced mode.
Beginner mode.
Then I've got the flaps set up. So flaps are up now.
Landing flaps.
I just hit, actually, let's do that again.
Flaps up.
Flaps up.
ESC 11.5 volts, 0 amps, 77 Fahrenheit.
Okay, that's the ESC telling me I've only got 11.5 volts. 11.6 is the minimum. Anything at 11.6 or less, we hear a report here. That means it's time to land and recharge the battery.
Takeoff flaps.
That's takeoff flaps, which is about 12, 13 degrees.
Landing flaps.
Landing flaps are about 45 degrees.
Flaps up.
And I find this really handy when I'm out flying and looking up at the sky and I'm changing switches, to have those switch changes announced to me. I also find it very handy to know what's going on with the battery in the airplane. And you set that up by programming warnings. Go to the telemetry page, and all this is in the description that you're going to find below.
5 volts, 0 amps, 77 Fahrenheit.
Okay, let's turn the volume down so we can't hear it anymore. So you go to the telemetry page in the setup, and then you can go over to and program the Smart ESC to give you several different reports. And the most critical of those is the battery. You got to know what that battery voltage is. That's a lot more accurate indication of how much flying time you have left than the timer that's on here, which is set for 8 minutes. And I can easily get 8 minutes out of this airplane if I'm not flying it at full power the whole time. That's out of a 3S 2200 battery pack. I've also got a 3S 3200 battery pack that I fly on this airplane as well, but it's pretty heavy. Okay, that takes care of that piece of programming. Give me a second here to get my thoughts organized. Okay, in this final section, we're going to talk about mix, rate, and expo. I've programmed 3 mixes into this airplane. One is for turns, and that coordinates a little bit of up elevator and a little bit of rudder as I make turns. And that's actually 2 separate rates. I set 1 rate for the rudder and 1 rate for the elevators. So as I turn to the right, I get a little bit of up elevator and a little bit of right rudder. Not huge, but it helps maintain altitude while the airplane is rolling. And as soon as I release, this is advanced experience mode. As soon as I release the ailerons, I need to put in a little up elevator here to maintain altitude, and I have to do that manually. That mix only works when the ailerons are deflected, and it works in both directions equally. I also put in an elevator mix for the flaps. You can see the elevator moving down as the flaps move down to offset the ballooning effect that you get from flaps. Now let's talk about rate. Excuse me. It's allergy season in Indiana. Okay, I have currently got the aileron set for a 60% rate and 0 expo. That's easily changed. Go to the DR Expo page in experience mode, switch to position here, and I'm going to change the rate from 60% to 100%. You can see how much more aileron I get. So I'm going to go back to 60%. I'm just trying these settings next time I fly. And I've got expo set to 0, which means that I get a proportional response from the control deflection to the movement of that control surface. I've also got it set to 0 for elevators and rudder. If I increase Expo, I move the deflection from being proportional to being concentrated on the upper end of the control movement. So I'm going to go from 0 to 75% Expo, which gives me, and I'm going to also move rate back to 100%, so that you can really see the effect. Now this is good up to a point. If you're an inexperienced pilot and you're a little nervous about making small movements in these controls, the problem is that as you get out closer to the edge of the control movement that's possible, you get a disproportional increase in control deflection. So here we go. I'm going to slowly start moving, and you can see what happens as I move to a right turn very slowly, right at the end. All of a sudden, you get a bunch of control movement. So let's assume you're a fairly new flyer and the airplane's not doing what you want it to do, and you go like this and you're still not doing. What you're going to tend to do is move that last little bit of control deflection, and you're going to overcorrect. So for the beginning flyer, I would suggest much less Expo than, say, 75%. So I'm going to go back to 60% rate on ailerons, where we started, and 0% Expo. And now I'm going to move the ailerons at the same rate as I did before. And you can see that they pretty much move at the same rate as the control stick. So in this case, if I panic, I don't get that huge deflection at the end of the throw on the transmitter. And I've programmed the elevators and rudder the same way. It's something you want to play around with. You want to have a little fun with all of this, but I'd suggest that you stay at, don't go much past 50% on Expo. You might get into trouble if you're a beginner. Experts don't like Expo. Guys that fly these things, you'll see them on YouTube videos that are doing 3D, hovering and doing all kinds of interesting things, doing some incredible aerobatics 3 feet off the ground. They do not use Expo because they don't like that disproportional control response at the end of the throws. They want very predictable, steady deflection as they move these controls. Okay, well, in summary, it's been a lot of fun. I have learned a lot in the last few months since I got back into this hobby. I've had some good experiences and I've had some bad ones. The biggest issue I'm having is finding a flying field. I've actually joined a club, but they're not active at the moment. There's some construction going on at their site, which is very near a local airport. They're enlarging the runway, and it has disturbed their flying site as a side effect of that. And it's right at the moment, it's basically not usable. Hopefully this summer we'll get that straightened out, as the construction's supposed to end before too much longer. So with that, I'll close, and I thank you very much. I hope you learned a few things. One final note, there is a link to a video at the bottom of the description that accompanies this video. It links to a Carbon S2 setup video by a guy by the name of Brian Phillips, and he's going to go take you through more details about how to set up the radios on this airplane. And strongly suggest you might want to take a look at that if you're a rank beginner and don't know much about these programmable transmitters. Brian takes you through setting up the flaps and a few other things that I'm not going to cover here. And a lot of this stuff really isn't very intuitive, especially I've noticed with these Spektrum systems. You're going to be spending a little time buried in the owner's manual if you've never used one before, at least I did. There's some things in there that the programming is, until you learn how to do it, so maybe a bit counterintuitive, but you can learn it. It's just like learning a new computer, like maybe going from a PC to a Mac or Android phone to an iPhone. They're very different, and it may take you a few days, but I can assure you it'd be well worth the investment to learn how to program these programmable radios. They are capable of doing some really, really marvelous things. I was out flying yesterday, and there was a guy with a glider who had put a camera in the cockpit of that glider, and that camera was attached by telemetry to a VR headset he had, and he was out flying the airplane with using VR, virtual reality, taking off and landing as if he was in the cockpit. It was pretty amazing to watch, and he let me see a video of one of his flights. It was actually quite interesting. So there's a lot of areas of RC to explore. I happen to live about an hour's drive away from the AMA World Headquarters over in Muncie, Indiana. I haven't been over there yet, but behind me you'll see this extra 300 that I also bought just shortly after buying the Carbon Cub, that I'll be taking over there in the near future for its maiden flight. So anyway, have a great day, and thanks for watching. Goodbye.